During elections, many vulnerable people face barriers that can impede on their full participation. Hence, they may suffer disenfranchisement.
In 5 days, the people of Edo will go to the polls to elect a leader to steer the affairs of the state for the next 4 years. People with disabilities are seeking inclusion so as to exercise their rights in the forthcoming governorship election.
They want a reasonable accommodation of their rights to vote as Nigerian citizens with access to disability-inclusive amenities and devices, adequate security, voter education, and right to voting priority. Joining us now is the Executive Director, Center for Citizens with Disability and Disability Policy and Legislative Advocate, David Anyaele, joining us on Skype from Abuja. David, good morning. It's good to have you this morning.
Good morning. I'm excited to join you.
Great, great. We're excited to see you too. Now, the elections are coming in Edo State, and by next month will also be the one in Ondo State. Talking about, or seeing it from the window of people with disability, do you have any concerns so far from what you've been monitoring and your engagement with the authorities?
Yeah, we are concerned. We are concerned because we are pursuing our campaign for equal voting access for persons with disabilities in Nigeria. And in order to ensure that people with disabilities are not left behind in the electoral process, for the Edo State governorship election this week, we conducted a rapid assessment of provisions by INEC for the election around people with disabilities. In particular, we wanted to document the experience of persons with disabilities during the last election in 2019, document and evaluate INEC provisions and preparedness for PWDs for this week's election, as well as to understand the needs of people with disabilities and the expectations, as well as to share our findings with INEC. This report, which we have published, indicates that INEC in 2019 did not make the adequate provisions for persons with disabilities participation in election in line with their equal access and participation of persons with disabilities framework of INEC, as well as the National Disability Act. We discovered also that some of their guidelines were not implemented during the 2019. People who are physically challenged suffered a lack of access to polling unit. They saw barriers such as steps, positioning of polling unit across gutter, whereas they also INEC gave indication that they are going to provide priority voting for persons with disabilities.
Right.
Majority of respondents claim that this provision was not made available for them.
Now, from that report, was there some sort of sustained engagement with either INEC or the necessary authorities to enforce perhaps certain changes and build on the success achieved in the previous election ahead of other elections coming up this year?
Yes, there have been sustained engagement with INEC, including the rec of Edo State. Last week, we engaged the INEC desk officer for persons with disabilities, and she also shared some of the provisions they've made to ensure that people with disabilities, participate without stress during the election. But all these things are some of the things they say, when they come for public fora, as we saw last week. It is the implementation that is worrisome. A situation whereby an average ad hoc staff of INEC does not understand from EC 40H, which requires them to document persons with disabilities that visit the polling unit for voting. They don't do it. Most times, the ad hoc staff do not understand what from EC 40H means to them. They don't understand what is a ballot paper. Some of this. So what we are saying is that INEC must take appropriate measure to end their ad hoc staff on equal voting access to ensure that people with disabilities are not left behind in the election.
All right. Well, when it comes to, when it comes to an enlightenment campaign and trying to educate the voter enlightenment and creating awareness, especially for people who have impairment in hearing and seeing and all of that. What is going on in that regard? What are you seeing?
Findings from our study shows that a few persons with disabilities were invited by INEC in Edo State at the local government level to participate in their training on voter education. However, the trained PWDs are complaining that there is no resources available for them to go to their various nooks and crannies to create awareness on the new voting pattern, especially this COVID-19 era. So they are worried because they don't have the resources. Non-profit organizations working in Edo State, including National Orientation Agency, are not doing enough in carrying out voter education sensitization that targets people with disabilities in this state. That is why we are asking INEC that they should collaborate with community leaders, with other non-profit groups to engage and create awareness on the voting protocol, especially now we have COVID-19 in Edo State. That is the situation. Few people with disabilities understand it, but the rest do not know, do not understand.
All right.
Because virtually bulk of the source of their information is through or one-on-one through their friends and others. But these people do not understand what INEC have provided for them at the local government area.
Okay.
Now, as it stands, it's 5 days to the election in Edo State. If appropriate measures are not put in place for persons living with disabilities, do you foresee some level of disenfranchisement, or is it going to be a total boycott of the election by persons living with disability?
That will be a kind of undermining the provisions of the National Disability Act, as well as undermining the INEC access and participation of persons with disabilities provision framework, which they've designed to enhance participation of persons with disabilities in the electoral process. During our research, we wanted to know from respondents, persons with disabilities in particular, whether these challenges will hinder them from participating in the election. They said no, that they are going to do all they can to ensure that they elect the candidate of their choice. In fact, they are going to vote. What that means is that they are going to be exposed to hardship in their effort to select the leader of their choice. Persons with disabilities are also worried about a security situation in the state. Recently, there have been issues around safety and security during the election day, and they are asking that INEC should collaborate with security agencies to ensure that there is no breach of security during election. And this, we have been saying this from time to time, that INEC should take measure. And we wonder whether these issues are really budgeted in their budgetary framework to minimize the hardship people with disabilities face, in particular the deaf people. Deaf participants, as respondents in the study we conducted, indicated that they were not given priority access. All this does not cost money. All it costs is sensitization of ad hoc staff of INEC to understand what priority voting is. But where there is no provision of sign language interpreters, we are recommending that INEC should allow individual deaf persons who are coming to vote to come with their own sign language interpreter and call for volunteer sign language interpreters to support them during this election. These are some of the things that we really are asking INEC. But you see, the challenge in Edo State is that Edo State is one of the states that have not adopted the National Disability Act. We are asking Governor Obasake to work with the State Assembly to adopt the National Disability Act, to implement the provisions, to encourage the citizens in the state to ensure that they don't discriminate people with disabilities, because some of these challenges stem from historical, cultural belief system that tend to give impression that people with disabilities participation in governance does not matter.
All right, it's just about 5 days to the election in Edo State, and election in Edo State usually, from the records that we have, is usually volatile, and then there's some level of uncertainty. When it comes to the issues of security, what concerns do you have precisely, and what would you like to see?
What we want to see is a situation whereby police should, would do their best by ensuring that non-fake policemen do not infiltrate in the electoral process. What we heard from Kogi State was that fake policemen came to the scene. Why must we have DIG, AIG, commissioners of police for just election? At the end of the day, we'll be hearing issues around fake police, fake soldiers. The police, the security agencies coming for this election, including the civil defense, should do their best to clear the area to ensure that only eligible people are seen around voting polling units. This is the only way to encourage people to come out. People with disabilities are worried about it. In fact, that was the issue they highlighted during the focal group discussions we had with them in the course of our study on INEC preparedness for persons with disabilities in this election.
Therefore, if I may interrupt your line of thought quickly, don't you think this is coming a little too late? Because it's just 5 days to the election. How much pressure has been put on the governor of Edo State to at least domesticate the Disabilities Act?
The pressure has been on. Last week, persons with disabilities in Edo State, conducted a rally and a sensitization in Benin, calling attention of the citizens on the need to domesticate or to adopt the National Disability Act in Edo State. Unfortunately, it seems to me that maybe the state governor is not hearing this. During one of the town hall meetings, the governor basically was there. I highlighted this challenge before him, that there is need for him to take measure to adopt the National Disability Act. All he needs to do is to work with the executive and legislature to ensure that this thing is conducted. They can equally create awareness by producing jingles and the advert that encourages the people not to discriminate people with disabilities, and that they're in tune with the provisions of that act. These are some of the things they can take as steps to ensure that people with disabilities are not undermined. Edo State is very important to Nigeria. And people with disabilities in Edo State are one of the brightest in terms of sports activities and others. It is really disheartening that at a time such as this, after 2016, when Governor Obaseki promised to pass disability law, that up to now we are still saying the same thing. I want to believe that measures will be taken, to protect people with disabilities, to encourage them to come out. We are talking about more than 500,000 PWDs in that state. We can't afford to discourage them from participating in governance.
All right, David Anyaele, thank you for your time on the Breakfast Show.